Welcome everyone to our webinar, How to Configure Your Apricot Database, 10 Ideas. I appreciate your interest in today's topic and your interest in making the most of your Apricot system. Thanks for joining us. My name's Jeff Hagwood. I'm an Apricot software consultant at Sidekick Solutions. Sidekick Solutions is an independent software consulting firm. We specialize in Apricot software, and we help new and existing Apricot users set up, streamline, and make the most of their Apricot systems. We offer a range of services for implementation, reporting, consulting, data migration, and also complete database audits and cleanup. We've been working with Apricot for about 4 years now with nonprofits, collaboratives, public sector organizations across the spectrum, large and small. And I'm excited today to share a little bit about what we've learned and some best practices that you can implement in your own Apricot system. I'm presenting today from Spokane, Washington. That's on the border between Washington and Idaho. That's where I live and work. Sidekick Solutions is a remote team. We have a team spread out across the country, and we also serve clients from across the country. We're thrilled to have everyone on the call today attending this webinar, and even a few international attendees along with those in the US. So we have a lot to cover today, so let's take a quick look at our agenda and then we can dive in. So during this webinar, we're going to take a look at 10 ways to configure your Apricot database. That's going to include a number of use cases and ideas. Then at the end, we're going to conclude with some outlining of next steps for implementation. If any of these use cases feel like a fit, what's your next step? Then we're going to wrap up with key takeaways and questions. So let's dive in. Apricot software is a nonprofit database for tracking and reporting on all of your data sets. That might include clients, programs, services, outcomes, volunteers, you name it, Apricot can track it. At its core, Apricot is a highly configurable database platform. You can customize it to match your organization's specific workflow and reporting requirements, with the goal ultimately of saving you time on service delivery, data management, and reporting. Now, Apricot offers a broad canvas of possibilities, and when you get the database out of the box, you get to customize it the way that you would like. But that flexibility in Apricot's features might be leaving you with a few questions on how to get started. You might be asking, which of Apricot's applications are the best fit for me? How are other organizations using Apricot? What's a must-have in our Apricot database design? Or even more broadly, how do we get the most from our Apricot system? Whether you're a new or existing Apricot user, designing and managing an Apricot database takes a dose of creativity. And it does help to have a few ideas and use cases as examples. Examples are especially important because Apricot database design impacts every aspect of your Apricot system: user experience, data structure, and specifically reporting. Good Apricot database design is something you want to get right. And the goal when you're designing your Apricot database is to build a logical set of data entry steps that users can follow, correlate associated records, where the data structure can be reported using Apricot standard features. And if we can put all those pieces of the puzzle together, we can use Apricot to its fullest capability. So to help you get started, we're going to cover 10 ways you can configure your Apricot database. This might be to operate programs, deliver services, engage with constituents, and generate reports. So the 10 are profiles and demographics, households and individuals, program enrollments, case plans, goals and notes, assessment scales and scoring, releases and approvals, referrals, classes and attendance, surveys, and then we're going to conclude with volunteer management. Now, my goal with this presentation is to spark ideas that might apply to your apricot. Some of these might be a fit, some might not be. Some you may already be using in your own apricot system, and some may feel a little too high level for the sophistication of your particular database. But I hope that you'll be able to take some nuggets away with you to implement in your own apricot system. The bottom line is that we're going to cover a lot of ground in today's presentation, but I do want the concepts to stick. So to help with that, you're going to receive an email following this webinar with a copy of the slides, which you can download, and a copy of the recording of today's presentation. We're also going to wrap up today's session with questions, which is an open time to submit anything that you have or want to ask about Apricot. So let's take a look at our first configuration idea. So most Apricot database designs start with a profile form. Profile forms are the starting point for navigation, data entry, and reporting, and they generally track an entity, like a client, a household, an organization, which might be a community partner or a service provider, or even a volunteer. Now, your profile form, depending on how your database is structured, may go by a different name. Might be something like intake or face sheet or demographics page. But the principle of the form is the same. In Apricot, a profile form tracks the demographics, the contact information, and any other details of a particular entity that engages with your organization. So whether your clients are children, youth, adults, you call them participants, or you're engaging with volunteers or community partners or service providers, profile form sets the foundation for Apricot. And generally, this is a tier 1 form. So here are a few ideas and best practices on profiles and demographics. First, it's important on your demographics page to validate your data entry. Demographic profiles and percentages are likely a core component of your reporting. I haven't run into an organization yet that isn't curious about participants by a particular demographic by percent. So you need to know the composition of your clients at intake and the characteristics of that population as they enroll in your programs and they receive services. To build accurate reports for demographic percentages, the questions on the profile should validate data entry. And when I mean validate data entry, I mean that we're using option fields to drive data entry choices. Now, Apricot comes with a full palette of option-based field choices like drop-downs, radio buttons, and checkboxes for this specific purpose. So I'm going to jump into Apricot, and we're going to take a look at my client profile form. Option choices are available in your field choices palette here on the right. Checkboxes, drop-downs, all the standard things you would expect. And you can see here that I've differentiated a couple of different types of fields that I often see. Race, for example, might be a drop-down instead of a text field. Drop-downs give us a really quick way to validate data entry and offer a single choice in data entry. Here's another differentiation that we often see. Primary language in this case is a radio button. A radio button allows you to select one value from a list. A checkbox is a little bit different. A checkbox lets you select many options from a list. Now we're going to get to how choosing between a checkbox and a single select field impacts reporting in just a moment, but it's important to take away that your field should validate data entry along single values wherever possible to report on demographics by percentage. So when we're reporting on demographics by percent, we want to do this in the easiest way possible. So we want to be able to build reports quickly and easily. This is where the differentiation between a single select and a multi-select field comes into play. I've created a report between the two fields that are on my profile. Primary language, where I'm using a single select radio button, and then primary language where I'm using a multi-select checkbox. Often we see Apricot systems using checkboxes too often, where a single choice provides for better reporting. You can see that a checkbox offers all of the options selected by that particular profile in a string of text. And we can't report on each one of these pieces individually without a filter. So in order to get an accurate percentage by English, I would need to filter on the option of English. Whereas if I have a single value, I can simply group and show percentages without any filters. This is true of any checkbox implementation. Checkboxes are not, you're not able to split them out because Apricot shows them as a string of text. Something to consider when you build your profile forms. Lastly, you can streamline Apricot data entry and validate numeric demographic data with in-form demographic calculations. Now, calculations aren't limited to just reports. We can actually put them on the forms themselves. You can calculate things like age at intake, total income from various income types, let's say if you're building a budget or outlining someone's income by various sources, number of people in a household, or even eligibility scoring if you need to track who's eligible as they come into your program. Data entry users can reference this data on the form itself, or they can pull it into reports for analysis. Now, while reports generally offer more calculation options, in-form calculations offer two benefits. Number one, users can reference those calculations during data entry in their regular work. And two, report writers can drag and drop the calculation field into a report instead of rebuilding each calculation from scratch. For example, if you're calculating the enrollment duration between two date fields, if you place that on a form, it's easy to drag and drop that into a report rather than dragging in the enrollment start date, the exit date, then a calculation field, subtracting the two, and getting your end result. So this is true on profiles and demographics as well. If you're doing total income by 5 or 10 sources, summarizing that income in one field so you don't have to add the 10 sources in a report. Now on to our second configuration idea. So your reports may require separate analysis on households and individuals. Like client profiles, you may use different terminology, but for the purposes of this webinar, let's talk in terms of household as a group of clients, which may include families or cases or something else. So to report on households and individuals as separate entities, your Apricot database needs two profile forms, one for the household and one for the client. These two separate forms will then be associated by a linking field, and the linking field will allow users to correlate the linked records and reports. This database structure allows us to count and analyze reports by either client or household simultaneously. You can see an example of this linking structure in the slide here. So the data you track about individuals may be different than the data you track about a household. Not only is this important in tracking separate profiles so you can report on a client and a household separately through a reporting lens, but you can also use Apricot's Form Designer to track separate demographics, characteristics, and details about these two different entities. The linking field correlates these two records. And there's a few tips to keep in mind. When you're tracking separate profiles for households and individuals, you will need to use a linking field. And we also recommend using the link description. So you can use the description to identify a household member's role, like primary or member. So if I go into a client profile, I can see that I can flag this particular person, this client, as a role within this family. This family represents a household, so I can flag this person as a primary or a member. Now, link descriptions are added from the form settings themselves, standard forms under the form designer in Apricot. If I open up the link properties, I can add a description here by checking this box, naming the description label, and then adding my options. This then carries through to the form as we saw on the front end. Now, in terms of reporting, there's a very important concept with respect to deduplicating clients and households. So if I open up one of my reports here, so here I have a clients by family report. So the grouping is by family or household, and you can see the number of members in that family. Now, if I was doing an enrollment report or a service report and I wanted to report on maybe an ISP that exists for the primary household member, or I want to report on demographics by household, I need to deduplicate this report. And I need to pull in the primary only, or one of the roles of my household. Because in this report, I'm getting multiple rows per household, which isn't going to give me an accurate count. One way that we can manage this, if we're using the link description, is to simply add a filter that finds my primary members. You'll see that my total rows goes from 11 members to 3 households based on the single client profile that is the primary. And that lets us deduplicate our report. So I did have a question here that revolves around informed calculations, which was an earlier topic, about whether or not they're a paid feature or they come out of the box. Calculation fields are available in every Apricot database, both on report side and on the form side. So let's take a look at our third configuration idea. Program enrollments. So if your clients can enroll in your programs more than once, or transition among multiple programs that you offer, you may need the ability to track program enrollment and exit. You'll use a program enrollment form in Apricot to track real-time program rosters, report on participation within a date range, and even log the status of a client at enrollment and exit. So tracking enrollments adds precision to your reports because you can correlate program activities to the associated enrollment. Enrollment forms are often something that's left out of Apricot database design, but it really is a critical component of your database. So let's take a look at a program enrollment form. So a program enrollment form might track the program that the person is enrolling in, the staff member assigned for caseload reporting, start date and exit date, and if exit date is filled in, potentially an exit reason. The combination of the enrollment date and the exit date calculates duration, and the way that we use enrollment date and exit date also identifies rosters. If the enrollment date is filled in and the exit date is blank, that's an actively participating client. If an exit date is filled in, that's a client that has exited. With these two dates and associated filters, you can create dynamic dashboards or reports for program rosters or even clients that enrolled in a date range. So let's take a look at a report that does this. So I have a program enrollment roster report where the enrollment date is not empty, means it's filled in, and the exit date is empty. I'm grouping by program enrolling, and I'm graphing or charting that based on the number of people who are enrolled in the program at any one time. Similarly, I could group by staff assigned instead of program enrolling to get a caseload. Now, there's also another filter set that you can use to identify anyone who was enrolled or participated in a date range. So let's say at the top of my report here, I'm going to use global values 1/1/2017 to 12/31/2017 to find anyone who was enrolled that year. Now, enrolled means quite a number of things. They could have enrolled before the start date of my date range, which in this case is 1/1/2017. They could have ended during that date range, ended after that date range. They could have started in the date range. They could still be active, but started in the date range or before. There are a number of scenarios that we have to deal with. And there's a filter set that you can use, which is enrollment date is before the end date of the global value. Exit date is after the start date, global value. And exit date is empty. And we can create a filter logic of 1 and 2 or 3. This being 1, this being 2, and this being 3. So you can see I have 9 total enrollees during this period, or enrollments during this period. And if I change the range that I'm evaluating, let's say I change this to 10/1 Q4 2017, that report will update, only showing me 5. And you can see these people started within the date range. These 3 have not exited, and these 2 exited this month. Now, beyond duration and the date of participation, program enrollment forms are prime locations for pre- and post-assessments if assessments are made at only those 2 intervals. You can add questions to your enrollment form to both streamline data entry at enrollment and exit and expand reporting capabilities to include comparing, that could be quantitative or qualitative, responses to measure change at enrollment and at exit. If you choose to use a program enrollment form, which again is especially important if a client enrolls in more than one program, we do recommend using Apricot linking fields to associate program enrollments with the activities and services that you provide. Otherwise, we would never know which case notes are associated to which program enrollment. If someone is coming in and out of your programs, we need to correlate the things, the activities, the services, the referrals, the notes that are attributed to their enrollment back to the original enrollment record. So in my database, I'm actually doing that with a dynamic dropdown. Now, this is a premium feature, but it does simplify data entry. So if I take this person and I'm going to enter a case contact note, I can select an associated enrollment so that this contact note is directly linked to an enrollment record. That way I can report on it with the enrollment in question. Now this is done in reporting very delicately. We need to enforce that linking relationship in my report. So scroll down here. You can see here that I've structured my report to include the client profile, linked to the program enrollment, linked to the contact note. This hierarchy structures my report so that I only get the case contact notes associated with a particular enrollment. Now, this is an often found mistake in reporting that can impact your counts fairly significantly. To make the contact note related to the program enrollment, first you need a linking field. Once it's there, you can choose how that case contact note is connected to the forms above it. In this case, I have it linked to the program enrollment and exit. I have 3 contact notes that do that. But what happens if I switch it to a client profile? And this is the default, by the way. So when you drag in a contact note, you have to manually select this option in order to get the linking relationship. You can see now that my contact note is no longer indented, and my count went from 3 to 5. Why is that happening? That's happening because Apricot is finding every combination of contact note and enrollment by client, even if they're not linked. So you can see here, I have the program enrolling selected here and the linked record listed here. Row 2 is a mismatch. Row 3 is also a mismatch, which means that these 2 records, the contact note, is not related to the program enrollment. So to force that relationship, we simply select, refresh our report, and that form will indent. Now we have the appropriate count. So let's take a look at our 4th configuration idea. So Apricot's flexibility to track and report on many data sets simultaneously makes it a great fit for case management programs. Once a database structure is in place for case management, we can do multi-level reporting to show detailed and summarized data on status, progress, and the activity of a case. Apricot is great at quantitative data, but some aspects of your services may require text-based input. Individual service plans, education plans, or other case plans can help case managers stay on track with challenge areas, initial assessments, and the goals of their clients. We can document case plans in Apricot and then refresh them as a case changes over time. This will replace paper-based processes or processes that are made off your Apricot database. So in Apricot, I have a system set up where I can log an ISP. I can select an associated program enrollment. The data was created, the data was closed if that's relevant, a title, and then I can add narrative descriptions for a number of different areas: challenges, needs, goals, summaries, and the rest. One of the key components to a case plan style of tracking in Apricot is to associate goals to your case plan and concentrate goal setting and goal tracking around your outcomes and domain areas. By tracking goal status and achievement, if those are linked to an outcome and domain area, you can easily report across your total population, even though the qualitative goals of each client may vary. You can even go beyond tracking status in Apricot to also track incremental progress, and you can even visually represent that progress in a line chart or some other visualization. So let's take a real quick look at goals. I have that set up as a wizard link. Now goals is a tier 2, and you can see it's not available in my document folder, and that's intentional. I don't want users to enter goals through the document folder. I want them to enter them and update them through the ISP. A wizard link is a great way to do that. I can correlate it to a program enrollment, write my goal here, track its status over time, and then the date ranges. Maybe tracking how long it took to achieve a goal or how long it took to find out that a goal was not achieved. So finally, case notes and activities can also be counted and reported on by client. That could be a date range or by program. The case manager can also reference the chronological history of notes and activities from a client's specific document folder. So if we go to a folder, we can view the history here. But there's a catch. Manually looking up the case plan and its associated goals and notes, that's a difficult process. You've got to jump around the database to get to what you want. The data is located in various places in the document folder. My goals are hidden and nested on an individual service plan. It's kind of a pain. So you need to give your users a single printable view of the entire case in one summary screen. You can do this with reports. So I've built an ISP summary report, which I can use to find a specific client. I'm going to enter their ID. This report is now narrowed down to one client, and I can see their individual service plan laid out vertically, which is much easier to read than when you're dealing with narratives and text-based data. And I've also grouped my goals by status. If I wanted to, I could add another section for contact notes, maybe sorted chronologically, so I could see a history. And all of this can be put in a summary report and then printed in one view or reviewed in one view, depending on how you'd like your users to access it. This makes the data much more accessible and organizes it better than in the document folder. All right, so let's take a look at our fifth configuration idea, and that's assessment scales and scoring. So aggregating quantitative data into meaningful reports can be a challenge, especially if the source data is tracked in paper forms. So that's where Apricot comes into play. With scales and scoring and back-end values, we can take a normal Apricot form and turn it into a quantitative tool. Assessments that include scales and scoring can exist on the enrollment, as we talked about, status and enrollment and exit. Could be tracked on an activity form, a service form, or may even be an independent assessment form altogether. Apricot includes a palette of field options for scales and scoring, and they're generally listed by the word masked value or identified as such. This includes drop-downs, radio buttons, Likert scales. All of them have front-end text values, like a Likert scale, which we could go from poor to excellent. Yet they can be rated on a scale of 1 to 5. So let's go ahead and take a look at a form here. I've built a survey form with some Likert scales. You can see that the front-end value is poor, neutral, good. My back-end value is 1, 2, and 3. The user sees the display value, and reports can report on both values, depending on your choice. Now, when creating back-end values, it's important to start your scales with 1, not 0. Depending on how your reporting plays out, we don't want zeros to be treated as null values or blanks. So it's better to treat your first value as a 1. I often get the question, how do we do reverse scoring? So what happens if my entire assessment is based on a scale of 1 to 5, but my questions are inversed in terms of how I want to score them? You can simply reverse the order of your back-end values to attribute reverse scoring. When you're in a report itself, take my survey submission report. Switching between the display value and the back-end value is as simple as changing the data style for that column. So you can see I've got the display value here. I can flip that to stored value, which changes it from 1 to 3. If you have a quantitative assessment that's taken at intervals, you'll want to use Apricot comparison reporting to analyze a client's progress over time. Apricot uses the first or last created distinction to compare pre- and post-assessments. Calculation columns can then be used to find the incremental progress between a pre and a post. So let's open up a report where I'm illustrating this. You can take averages across these values. You can work with these values in a number of different ways to calculate. So when I'm dealing with first and last created, pre and post, I can change or add aliases, and aliases tell Apricot which record I want to view. So in this case, I have an alias of my first created record and my last created record. And what I'm doing is I'm trying to put those side by side in the same row so I can calculate the difference between the two values. So if I open up the column, this is the same field. This field on this column is the same field as this column here. I can change my alias to tell Apricot which form to pull from. So in the first column, I want the first created. In the second column, I want the last created. This allows me to calculate a difference between the two to chart progress. So when I'm all set, my report looks something like this. These two columns are completely separate and different participant self-assessments. The original score here was 1, the last score was 2. That gives me a change in score of 1. I can then chart those averages, or this can be done by client, by aggregate, across a population. I can even set goals and target lines to show where I'd like to see the values and where they actually end up. Now, if you're going to use comparison reporting, it's important to note that you'll need to enter records chronologically by creation date. So this is important if your users are backdating records. You want to try and get them to enter records chronologically. Otherwise, this comparison reporting won't work. This includes imports. Let me say that one more time. The chronological creation of a record includes imports. The first record in an import file is imported before the second record in an import file. So you will need to sort your imports by a date field before importing them to maintain continuity for this type of reporting. It's important that you enter these records chronologically in order to get the appropriate output. Our sixth configuration idea. So clients may sign a host of agreements and approvals throughout their relationship with your organization. In addition, you may have internal staff members that need to sign case notes or service records. and supervisors that may need to sign off on funding requests or case closures. Apricot has the tools to help you do this. In cases where signatures are captured on paper documents outside of Apricot, we recommend getting them into Apricot. Where possible, we know that there are some exceptions. Now, the key to remember about attached doc fields specifically is that those records can only be downloaded one at a time. So if you need to download, let's say, authorizations in bulk, you might not want to use the Apricot attach doc field because you can only download one at a time. The Apricot signature field is fairly self-explanatory. You can sign in the database itself. A client can sign, you can sign, your supervisors can sign, any part of your workflow can sign. But the attached document and signature fields offer the structure to your data, but not really the workflow for your data. So what we like to do and what we like to recommend is building workflow reports for approvals. For example, if a supervisor needs to sign off on a funding request, you can first create a report of all records that still need to be signed and then add it to a bulletin that is accessible by the supervisor. When the supervisor logs into Apricot, they'll see a list of documents awaiting their signature. And then by adding their signatures to the internal forms in Apricot, staff members can easily sign the necessary documents without having to shuffle paper, and those records will fall off of the workflow report. So let's take a look at an example of this. So I have a conditional report at the bottom of this where I'm looking for referrals to be approved by a supervisor. You can see that I have two categories: not yet sent to the supervisor for approval. This might mean that an internal user is still working on the record. And waiting for supervisor approval, which means that the supervisor, it's in their queue, but they have not signed it yet. So if I pick one of these here, and whatever design you put in place to do this, I've added a drop-down field, send to supervisor is yes or no. If I change that to yes, you'll see that my report will automatically update with the approvals. Now instead of 2 and 2, I have 1 and 3. So we'll do that one more time. These are what we call trigger reports. And trigger reports prompt the next action by a user. And we do this with conditional logic in a report. Now I've got 4 that are waiting for supervisor approval. So on the topic of referrals, that's our next configuration idea: referrals and community partners. Now, you may work with a network of partner organizations to coordinate services, resources, refer clients, or keep a network of community organizations that can support your clients either from start to finish or as supplementaries to your programs and services. Apricot can help you organize this complex web of incoming and outgoing referrals with triggers, secure web forms, and then partner agency profiles. So Apricot can efficiently send and capture referral data for analysis. So you can create referrals that are outgoing and send email triggers to community partners. You can accept Apricot incoming referrals through a web form, a secure web form. This might include submitting a URL to your community partners for them to use as an ongoing resource. And if you need to report on referrals by provider, so who they're coming from or who you're sending to, you can create a separate profile for community partners and use it as a de facto Rolodex to link to incoming and outgoing referrals. So let's take a look at how this might work. So on an external referral in my client profile, I have a link to a community partner, which allows me to select from any of the community partners listed in my database. And I can create as many profiles as I want. By linking, I can now validate data entry and group and organize reports by that partner organization. Now you'll notice that I created an auto-populate field here for some of the partner referral agency information. There's a trick in Apricot that we recommend using because it makes reports a lot easier. Instead of reporting on the link, I can actually report on the auto-populated data. So let's say that I'm linking a referral agency to this external referral. And let's say I want a little bit more data to come through either for my end users or reporting. I can simply use auto-populate fields to populate based on that link, let's say the service type. Now my users don't need to double enter the data, and the data is readily accessible on the external referral form for reporting. I don't even have to pull in any data from the referral agency in my reports. Now, if you're auto-populating, we recommend the target form get a locked value. These likely are values that you don't want to change, so you could simply lock them so users can't modify them. On to our 8th configuration idea. Workshops, classes may be a part of your suite of services within your programs, and tracking attendance is an important part of data management and class management. But entering records one at a time can be extraordinarily time-consuming. So what are our options in Apricot for tracking attendance? The simplest, and as I just mentioned, the most time-consuming is single record creation. Create an attendance record for each event that someone attends for all of those participants. Alternatively, you can use batch record creation. You can add the same attendance record for multiple clients at once. This will streamline data entry, but you can only enter the same record for each person in your batch. So if I'm tracking attendance, I'm going to grab a different form here, a client intake form. Batch record creation is great if everyone is attending the same class and everyone has the same information. Where this tends to break down is when I have different statuses. So let's say I want to track those who attended and those who did not attend. If I was using the batch record creation tool, I would need to do 2 batches, one for those who attended and one for those that did not attend. Because when I save these attendance records using batch record creation, the same record gets placed for all of the people in my list. Now, an alternative to this is the registration grid. Registration grid is an additional feature in Apricot. Not every database has it, but it allows you to add attendance with different values for each person. This is best if you're leading some kind of cohort or workshop, or if you track attendance every day of the week or some interval of the week. So the registration grid looks something like this. Kind of like an Excel spreadsheet with my days across the top, my enrolled participants down the side, and I can simply fill all of these out differently for my different records. Every time I save these attendance records get placed in the document folders of each of those clients. So if I go and I find my you can see that here is my attendance record here for the 12th. So as a reminder, registration grid is great for customized attendance entry, things like present, absent, excused, unexcused, or if the hours attended or the attendance notes might vary by attendee. Now our 9th configuration idea. Surveys and feedback can be useful for measuring participant and constituent satisfaction. And Apricot tools make this fairly easy and readily available to do that. Secure web forms are available in any Apricot database. They just need to be turned on. Online surveys and feedback forms have the same customization options as any other Apricot form. You can choose to have respondents identify themselves or remain anonymous. You can include qualitative and quantitative data for measurement or review. You can publish secure web forms on your website so they're easy to distribute, or you can leave them orphaned as single pages, just providing people with the URL. And Apricot reporting can aggregate and organize survey and feedback data so that you can analyze it. Now, one of the ways that we recommend taking a look at survey data is in a very simple report. If you have a single form as a survey, that report might have a couple of key elements. Number one, a set of global values to identify a date range. These are user-entered values that can be changed on the runtime side of the system. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. Changing the date would change the output of the report. In addition, we recommend having one section per question, analyzing the percentages and row counts based on the submissions, and then filtering by the creation date and the global values. This will provide you a unified report and uniform report that you can use ongoing for as long as that form is active. So last and certainly not least, our 10th configuration idea is volunteer management. So volunteers can be an integral part of events, service delivery, and program engagement. However, tracking them in Apricot should not exist on your client profile form, or there are rare cases where that should be the case. Volunteers may need their own profile. And depending on how you want to set that up, that might be a secure web form that they can fill out, like an application. It might also be a simple contact info form that identifies some preferences and contact information for your volunteers. The good news is that with a tier 1 stack for volunteers, tier 1 stack meaning a number of tier 2s below it, you can track basically anything you want about your volunteers. Assignments, activities, trainings and certifications, warnings, incident reports, anything that you would like to track about volunteers can be placed in Apricot. If on the profile form you are tracking preferences for a particular day of the week or time, you can even use simple searches like days available on the search screen to find those who are available Sunday and Monday every week. One other neat feature about volunteer management is that you can associate volunteer activities with events, opportunities, or projects. So here, if I'm logging some date worked, I say that they were here for an hour. I can link that to a particular program, an event, or any other aggregation that I might want to see time sorted by. So let's say this is related to employment mentoring. I can save this record, and now I can report on volunteer activities by opportunity, event, project, whatever other sorting possibilities you might want in your reports. So if these feel like a fit in your Apricot database, what do you do next? So we recommend taking a look at a three-step process. Number one, gather some requirements. Before you go anywhere, you need to do some discovery. Once you've done that discovery, draft a sketch, put a blueprint together. Doesn't have to be complex, doesn't have to be sophisticated, but list out what you might want to track and how you might want to track it. And before you go all in with an implementation, not a bad idea to build a sample or a demo so you can at least see that tool or a piece of the tool in action. There's a couple of ways you can assess gathering requirements and drafting a blueprint. We've listed those here on the right, these discovery processes. You can analyze your workflow. So what are the steps of your programs or services? You can assess your reporting requirements. So what data do you need to track and report on? Or you can get feedback from users. So if you feel like you're stuck determining how you might want to approach your Apricot implementation, these are 3 ways that you can get the ball rolling and start asking questions. So Apricot offers flexible features and a scalable architecture to build out a database. But as we mentioned earlier, the flexibility and customization of the system can sometimes feel a little daunting. It helps to have ideas and use cases like those we suggested today to narrow Apricot's possibilities down to the configuration that's a best fit for you. If I was to give you 3 takeaways for today, I think the first one would be that, can Apricot track and report on XYZ, whatever workflow or solution that you're looking for? And the answer is most likely. Apricot's a very capable platform, and its tools are available to track nearly anything. The best thing you can do is to start with ideas and use cases and build from there. And when you're thinking about building Apricot, one of the most important things is to think about how you operate your programs. Apricot is a database builder and an app builder, and we want it to match your workflow. So that concludes today's presentation. I appreciate everyone for attending today. We hope these concepts and ideas will help you implement something great in Apricot. We're going to open it up for questions in just a second, but if you enjoyed today's presentation or our approach to Apricot, let's find some time to connect. I'd love to learn more about your organization and how you're using Apricot and see if it's a good fit. We offer a variety of services that clients have found some benefit in, and I'd love to discuss those with you. Our door is always open, so keep us in mind next time you have questions about Apricot. Thank you. So let's open it up for questions. So I have 2 questions that were submitted here. Can you add members to a family that are not clients? For example, serving children, but you might want to track the parents' names and be able to search for the parents. So tracking other entities that you might not be serving that might be supplementary to your program, that can be done in a variety of ways. There is no one way to do that. Parents could be a tier 2 underneath that client. They could also be a separate tier 1 altogether, linking back to the family record, which aggregates different types of entities together in one unified view. If If the number of entities related to a family that are not being served it could be infinite, meaning it's not always 2 or always 1 or always 5, then we recommend using a linking record. If it's static, like in your case, parents, there will only ever be 1 or 2 parents. Because it's static, we could add fields to a child's profile that identifies parent name 1 and parent name 2. So that's really a rule of thumb to use. If you need more than a discrete number, use a linking field. And if you have a discrete number of things that you need to track, entities that you need to track, you could use fields on a form. Another question, is there a way to print an ISP for all of a person's clients instead of printing one at a time? Certainly. The formatting might get a little difficult to read because all of the ISP details would be included for all clients in a single view. But you could certainly put all of one person's clients and the details for those clients in one report. You likely would not be able to use the vertical layout as we showed earlier, because you would want those clients broken out by row, most likely. So there are some limitations, but you can certainly build your report to include more than one ISP if that's something you need to be printed. So I have another question here. So what is the best practice for tracking services by household or individual when individuals are added or leave a household? Do the previous demographics change also, or are they static? So it depends on how you outline your demographics on the household profile. If they are fields, you can update them, but they are static. They're point in time references. So if you say that there are 3 adults and 2 children, and one of 3 adults, 3 adults, let's say there's another family member living in the home, and one of those adults leaves, you would now have 2 adults and 2 children. Changing the numeric field on a form from 3 to 2 would change your reporting. And it's basically, it's dependent on the lens through which you're looking. If your report is based on point in time, then the profile fields might be a good option. If household composition is something you need to track historically, you may need an entirely separate record to track that. So this could be something like a program enrollment form, where you track the number of adults and number of children in a household at enrollment. That could be one way to do that, because if you need historical tracking, you need a separate record for that history. In any case where you're overriding the data, you're using more of a point-in-time reporting mechanism. So I hope that answers your question. If it doesn't, go ahead and send back another one. So here's a really great question, and I appreciate this one. So if we don't have a perfect implementation from the beginning, is it something that can be cleaned up later or shifted in purpose? Is staged implementation and improving a system over time an okay way to implement, or does it have to be all done at the beginning? So I actually prefer incremental improvements to a database. However, sometimes when you pull the thread associated with a change, many things need to change. And when that happens, you might need to do a refresh across a number of forms. Implementing something like a program enrollment is potentially one of those moments. The biggest decision that needs to be made when you're dealing with implementation of an existing system is whether or not you keep or abandon your data. For example, if you choose to split your data on a fiscal year or a calendar year, abandoning your data and building a new structure and using an older system of reporting for the old data and a newer system of reporting for the new data is viable. But those decisions really are made on a case-by-case basis. In summary, my preference is to do incremental builds. But if and when the thread gets pulled and it continues to unravel a larger and larger systemic problem or challenge, then a full implementation or re-implementation of part or whole of a system may be required. Very nuanced answer. I'm sorry about that, but it does depend pretty specifically on where you're at and how your system was designed originally. But hopefully that gives you something to go on. Great, so there are no other questions, so we'll go ahead and break for now. If there are questions following today's webinar, you will be getting an email, and I'd be happy to take questions offline. Simply reply to that email, and you'll get in touch with me directly. So thank you everyone for attending today, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.